Welcome to the weekly podcast of First United Methodist Church in Costa Mesa, California. Founded in 1912, the church gathers on Sundays at 10 a.m., and we invite you to join us anytime. For more information, visit our website, costamesafirst.umc.com, or connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
Well, what a joy it is to be together this morning. We have been in the midst of a series called Across the Room, and we kind of came to it with sort of the idea that there were lots of people that could share that knew even more than any of us on different topics, things that are kind of confusing if you often hear, well, this is the biblical perspective or this is the Christian understanding thereof. And the funny thing is it's often different, right? And so we kind of came at it, a group of us, as we talked about, like, why should we as a community talk about these things? Well, we really feel like Jesus is in the space of crossing the room. So it might be that as you hear us talk, there might be something that you feel a little uncomfortable with, and that's actually great. We think that's the space for the Holy Spirit. In every conversation, these are just conversations. They're a little different than a sermon. We're not bringing any sort of biblical understanding today. We're not answering a lot of those questions. If you have those questions, would love to chat with you about that. More, we're talking about why are these things important, we as the church. And so we began those conversations with why is the conversation around race important in the church. And I heard it was incredible. So great to hear from Pastor Q. And then after that, we kind of talked a little bit more about like what does immigration have to do with our faith? And we heard a little bit from Reverend Bell down on the coast, who's doing incredible work just working with immigrants and their families and refugees and what that looks like. So today, I got to come back, and a lot of people are like, you are on sabbatical. Jerry told me he's going to pretend. Jerry, who's one of our coffee connoisseurs, said, you're not supposed to be here, so I'm pretending you're not. And so I'm not supposed to be here. I'm in the middle of renewal leave, which meant my staff has been incredible. If you can just, kudos to my staff. They have been running this place. I had, thank you. Guys, 2 weeks ago, I drove by here on my way to go to another church, and the parking lot was full, and I had massive FOMO. So I just need you to know how great it is to know that when I'm gone, this place is running so well. And so the conversations have been great. This place has been running well, but I have come back, not just because this was a weekend when I could do that, but because I was really excited to share in this conversation with you. David's actually screening his film, which has to do with this topic, in North Carolina, so I get to do this conversation, but also because I have known Justin, our speaker, for a little while, so it's been fun to follow his career. So I want to introduce you to him, and then what you're going to see in front of you is simply a conversation that I think if we're willing to cross the room, we might engage in ourselves. So I'm not going to do a lot of the talking. Sorry, Justin is. But I want to give you some of the history of Justin so you know who he is. So this is Justin Solomon Massey, and he said Massey like the Catholic Church. So here he is. He's bringing all his Massey self right here. He has been, he's a program associate for Equality California, which if you don't know them, they're responsible for organizing the Southern California Pride events, and they support the organization's healthcare, immigration, and safe school initiatives. Prior to joining Equality California, he worked as an independent political campaign consultant for local candidates. You should Google him, guys. He's done a lot of stuff. He is active in local politics and nonprofit organization. But what kind of helps him in this space is that Justin graduated with a bachelor's degree in political science from Wheaton College in Illinois, where he came out and began his LGBTQ+IA activism and started the first ever LGBTQ student group at a school which was ranked in 2011 by the Princeton Review. Ready for it? The #1 least LGBTQ-friendly campus. Great place to come out and figure out your sexuality, right? So we are just blessed to have him here. Really excited to hear his story and also hear kind of where we can kind of rest and be with God. So Justin, will you come on up? I'm going to turn on your mic here. If you'll go right here. And if you want to take a seat, this is very non-denom of us. How am I good at this? We actually... Yeah, I know. I need a coffee, my Bible's here, just to show. as we were starting this series, I said we need like a table to sort of symbolize the communion table, and we'll have the conversation around it. And I kind of want some informal benches, and I was like, where could I get that? And I belong to the lead pastors group here in Costa Mesa, which are like the most incredible dudes who let me hang out with them. They're so great. And I just sent out an email. I was like, hey, does anyone have like a tall table and 2 like benches? And they're like, we're non-denom pastors, yes. And they're like, so like they actually like a bunch of them. So we're blessed to have this from a church here in Costa Mesa. So are you ready, Justin, for the rapid fire?
Yeah, I'm ready. Oh yeah, mic's on. Your
mic's on, you look good, you sound good. Okay, so can you just tell us a little bit about your story and why sort of this issue of not just, the inclusion, obviously if you look around, you might notice that we really do believe in inclusion here, but we feel like there's something more we're being called into. So can you explain to me kind of what your story is and why the idea of beyond inclusion is important for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey everyone, as you know, I'm Justin. Really excited to be here with you today. And just for starters, I'm going to use the term LGBTQ. There's a lot of ways to refer, and obviously a lot of acronyms and letters, but that's a succinct way that I feel is encompassing of our community. So that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer questioning. So I grew...
Which is great, because I am a heterosexual, cisgender white woman, so I'm always afraid of using the wrong term. So thank you for giving me the right term to use.
Absolutely. Yeah, and recognizing that for myself, I am a cisgender, white, gay male, so my perspective, what I can give is from my own viewpoint, and I have friends that have had experiences vastly different than my own, much more complicated than my own as well, which certainly puts me at a place of privilege to be able to even have this conversation, right? And just to one definition, so cisgender means not transgender. So transgender is a person who was born and given was told, you are a boy. They looked at the anatomy and said, this is your gender. And then that person felt that did not align with who they were and who their own gender was. So I was born identified as male, and I am male, so I'm cisgender, just so we know what that means.
Good to start. We're starting there. Everyone comfortable?
Terminology.
Yeah. Get comfy in the seats, guys. This is only getting better from here. Let's go.
Yeah, so I was born and raised here in Orange County. I grew up in Laguna Niguel, went to high school at Dana Hills High in Dana Point, and had a loving family. My mom and sister are here with me today. But grew up in a traditional evangelical home where conversations about sexuality and this topic in general wasn't really discussed. As I think is pretty common in some of our churches. And, the expectation is, that I would get married to a woman and have children, and, that's a lot of pressure to have looming over you. And for me, my faith wasn't just something that was presented to me by my parents, but it was something that was deeply important to me. And when I was 12, I first started wrestling through my own sense of my sexuality and my identity, and I lived in a lot of fear. About how I would be accepted, about what my own identity meant for inclusion within my church spaces, but even just the love of God, I felt like that wasn't an option to me. And I think, just the Bible passage and the song were just so perfect to lead up to this conversation that, we're no longer slaves to fear. We are children of God, and that we need to embrace and understand that as we tackle this conversation and every hard conversation, and as well as this passage, come to me all that are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. And that's something that, I think back on what my experience was, and I didn't feel that kind of rest in God. When my faith became important to me, I saw my identity and my sexuality as really being antithetical to my sexuality. And so I kind of saw it as this give and take that the more I became a Christian and loved God, the less my sexuality would be an important part of me, and the more I'd be able just to blend in with my community. And I found that to not be the case. And like a lot of LGBTQ people, I've struggled with mental illness and struggled with my own sense of worth. Because of the messages that were both told to me and that I instilled, that this was a part of me that was broken and evil, and that this was something that I had to overcome to be embraced by the love and grace of God. And I've, as I've gone on this journey, I've found that that's absolutely not true. And in fact, is counter to the very messages that we're hearing today, right? That the kind of pain and sorrow and grief and shame I felt was not the rest that God it offers to us, and the love that he offers to us. Sorry, I'm going off a little bit.
You're totally fine. He's preaching, friends. Just get ready.
But so, this was all complicated stuff. And for me, I think like a lot of us that have, these pieces of ourselves that we're afraid to present, I hid it, and I did everything I could to stop it. And I immersed myself in my church and my community. And, I value and love that. And, but there was a point at which it was very, very hard and painful for me. When I was 15, I went to my first conference with the now defunct Exodus International, which was the leading ex-gay evangelical organization. I really started embracing the literature of reparative or ex-gay conversion therapists. And, I thought that I needed to be something other than what I was to be accepted. Unfortunately, as I was able to move on from that and understand even before I came to terms with myself that kind of thinking is unhealthy and unhelpful, as well as just bad science. But it was really coming to my college, Wheaton College, that I really had to wrestle on my own with my identity and my sexuality. In high school, I just kind of shoved it down and didn't think about it. Right, it's figuring out yourself, right? But in high school, I was, the quintessential perfect Christian boy. I was the president of my Christian club on campus at my high school, and I didn't think about, what this meant. And I think something that I just want to reflect on is that I think, at least in the community I came from, the idea of bearing your cross and suffering as something that is a sign of solidarity with Christ, which is absolutely true. But I think that mentality ended up, for me, justifying a lot of pain and shame that I felt, even to the extent of when I was bullied in middle school for being gay, thinking that I deserved that because it was my cross to bear, and it was something that was reflective of Christ's suffering rather than our suffering with the oppressed and, being alongside people. Anyway, so I went to Wheaton College, was involved heavily. I was class president my first year there. And I still wasn't out, but I was finding that these conversations kept coming up about sexuality. And I had peers I started to connect with that were impacted and struggling and felt like they couldn't be themselves and were dropping out of classes and being hospitalized and all of these things. And so I really got involved in this conversation about student care. And it got to a point where I was connecting with my peers, and I was studying political science at the time. So I was thinking about systems of oppression and how identities and how us being other impacts everything. It goes way beyond just purely how I feel about my romantic attractions or interests. It's how do I fit into a space? How do I feel like I am other than the ideal and forced to deal with shame and a lack of power as a result? And thinking about that and connecting with friends that were people of color and women and other marginalized groups who were similarly in that, ideal Christian white evangelical space, not feeling included, that really built up my own identity and understanding of the significance of owning who you are. And how, that can be an asset coming to any kind of conversation with these kinds of perspectives. And so before I even was morally okay with being gay, I was like, I'm gay. Like, I can use that term, even if I don't think I can date people, even if I think, even if I'm wrestling through this theology, this impacts every single piece of my life and the way I engage with God, the way I engage with peers and community, and the ways that I think about myself. And so that kind of proceeded. But as I saw peers struggling and connected with friends, we, decided we needed a space to come together, and there was just so much isolation. And for, a couple years, I got to be a voice of inclusion on campus and fighting for better policies. And there was so much fear on campus and so much we had to battle in terms of, administration and donors and people that didn't want this conversation even to be had. But it was important, and I think it was, I think it saved lives. And it was an honor for me to be the first person that many people had ever come out to, and to be someone that says, I know what you're going through, and I get that. And that obviously led to my journey of, of more self-acceptance and realizing that, really peace and rest is what God offers us. And the kind of pain and isolation that LGBTQ people have faced is not God's will. And, all fruit that comes from God is good. And we know because of the blessings of God who he is. And there was so much pain coming from this that it couldn't be of God. And that was part of, kind of my journey of realizing that it's solidarity with those that are hurting. That really is, the gospel. And also, really excited to be here with my boyfriend today, of a couple of years. But yeah, so that's, long-winded. And now obviously I work more on the structural political end, with Equality California. We're a civil rights group. And so it's kind of engaging outside of just the faith circle, but fighting for inclusion broader. Sorry for that really long answer. I hope that was okay.
If you can't tell, our new system has a couple of things. If you're Yelping this, flawless is the word we often offer for people who are Yelping this service. As I hear your story, the piece that I think that kind of kicks into our next question is, when we talk about issues like this, often when we're on two different sides of the room, we dehumanize it. So we start to call people the issue, right? And we're just going to go back and forth like this. It's probably good that there's only one mic because, pastor without a mic is probably a good thing. But I feel like it often is the moment of dehumanizing and not able to say, well, that person has this. I think what I heard from your story is once you were able to accept yourself, you became an advocate to help others accept themselves. And as someone who's been able to walk with a couple of folks through this experience for themselves, it's that initial, so many friends of mine have said, like, I was a huge LGBT, advocate, and then I realized, because I am. But I think you're so wrapped up in that identity of it's not okay, that you sort of start with the justice, Holy Spirit piece, and then you kind of are able to knock in. So thank you for sharing that part. As we talk about the challenges in regards to the church, you guys might have not been familiar with some of the terms he used. So he talked about reparative therapy, and he talked about an organization that was known as the Exodus Project. Go ahead and Google that. You're welcome to get your phones out. It was a movement that really believed that they were helping the mental health of folks by sort of asking them to step out of their sexuality. And there were quite a few poster children for this. So people who are advocates of this, people who were hey, I am no longer gay. And so friends of mine who are look, these are success stories. Look at them, they're no longer. And then several years later have been just kidding. And so I think it's an interesting thing to follow and look at, because you will often hear people say, what about reparative therapy? And isn't that kind of getting rid of the story of those who are experiencing that? And we're not in any way suggesting that for some folks that wasn't, it was unhealthy, but it wasn't something that we don't want to step on anyone's story, but we also know that was a really damaging time in history. So as we define the challenges, what do you think the big challenges that we talk here in this space are?
It's a really good question. I think, as we've kind of reflected on a bit, and, has kind of been a theme is fear. Fear either of questioning, what we've known to be true and thinking that could change everything. Fear of becoming politicized, of alienating other people through pushing for inclusion. And I think, those fears are obviously, it's complicated because you have your communities that you don't want. Regardless of how complicated it is our call to love and to push for those that are marginalized. And I know a lot of the fear that we had at Wheaton College, or that the administration was that people were going to think that we were, even using the word LGBTQ they thought was too political. So we had to call our LGBTQ group. It was a community for same-sex attracted students. Which is certainly an interesting way to water it down and take away, the revolutionary aspect of owning your identity and being proud of it. So yeah, I don't know. I wrote a lot of different thoughts down. I think part of the challenge is, so it's a complicated conversation because you have the broader church in general. You have church spaces like this that are welcoming and want to include people. And I think the challenges are so different and, complicated across those spaces. I think within spaces like this where we know people are welcomed and affirmed, how do you bring in LGBTQ people that have faced so much hurt and pain that they are really hesitant, or they don't, it's hard for a lot of my friends to really even trust any kind of religious institution to provide them with love when they felt so much.
Yeah, I think my friend said it was harder coming out as a gay Christian than coming out gay. Because his friends were like, why would you do that to yourself?
Right. And I think part of changing as a church and becoming more inclusive is looking both at, a very, very long history of pain and discrimination, and the way that the church has even become politicized and been a tool to push for discrimination. So looking at that, and then looking at even when a church does become open and affirming, what are the institutions and programs that are in place that are not reflective of having those people in mind. I read a really interesting blog post while I was prepping, and it was this blogger and student who essentially said, these are the 10 reasons why LGBTQ people don't want to go to your LGBTQ affirming church.
I don't want to read that right now.
It was fascinating. And part of what he said is that, I'm going to read just a little bit of it. He said, your church may be doing well on the question of inclusivity, but 2 millennia of erasure, discrimination, violence, and outright hatred do not simply go away. Churches as organizations are not just filled with cisgender heterosexual ways of thinking, but in history were specifically built and developed as cisgender heterosexual spaces. So you need to think about not only like how is your theology, but how is the atmosphere of the church? How are the programs? Are they geared towards people that are, outside of the majority? So I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts there of different kinds of challenges we face.
Do you guys feel like all these conversations is like we just get to skim the surface? So the whole point is that we're trying to start the conversations that you guys are going to have at lunch, because I think this is not obviously something that we can get to the complete bottom of how to be good at these things, or even like adequate at these things, or even how we feel about these things. This really is a conversation starter to get us to cross the room. So Justin, I just want you to release the fear that you have to answer all the questions. He was like, this is such a big topic, and you want me to cover it in a church service? No, we want you to start to have people think about, like, why does this matter to the space? And part of that you brought up, which was the idea of mental health, and so the idea of people feeling worth and value. So if we were going to experience this issue on earth as it is in heaven, right? The kingdom of God, that's what we talk about here all the time, that we're in this sort of liminal space where it's both now and yet there's more to come. What would that look like? If we were to experience that within a community, what would that look like?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, and I was talking with my boyfriend a bit about this because there's obviously work that it takes to get to that kind of place, and it's not just that we can like open the doors and be an inclusive, loving, welcoming space where everyone feels like they're a part of it. There's steps to get there, and there is that history to address and to say, and take ownership as a church that we're sorry for the hurt that we've done, and we want to be a space that is welcoming, and even just being at the forefront of being able to acknowledge that we have flaws and that we're progressing, and that our church institutions are not perfect, but that we want to go in that direction. I think that's huge, just acknowledging that. I think the idea of heaven on earth when it comes to this issue would be unity and embrace across ideological and theological differences, which is hard. Like, there have been so many families torn apart, so many friendships that have ended over theological differences and lack of respect for people. And so just at a basic level, just being able to sit in tension and love and respect and understand that we're not going to agree on everything, but that's okay. But that we respect each other as, children of God. And I think, moving on on from that is a world where no one lives in fear of being and embracing, who they are, and being proud in that and seeing that as an asset. And I think that was one of the biggest shifts for me from going from the Wheaton College environment to coming here to Orange County and working in spaces where my identity as an LGBTQ person was seen as an asset. It was, you have a unique experience and you have valuable insight that we're going to benefit from and learn from. And that diversity is something beautiful and actually reflective of the face of God and who he is.
Or she, just kidding.
Thank you. He, she, or they. Which is probably too confusing at this point. But another one would obviously be the alleviation from the disparities that LGBTQ people face, both politically, discrimination-wise, as well as our high rates of mental illness from the stigma that we face, unemployment, poverty, homelessness, violence, and the role that our church can take in standing up against that. And I think that's some of the biggest frustrations I've had with the broader church, is even, individuals that are, have these theologically, I guess they're not sure where they are theologically, and they can't necessarily say that they 100% can affirm LGBTQ people, but then you have trans women of color that are getting shot and killed and dying in the streets and getting taken advantage of, and we're not able to call that out as injustice because we're afraid, at least in, from the background I come from, we're afraid of affirming sin. And so even when discrimination would happen against LGBT people, it was like, oh, that's not right, but that's a sin. Like the need to condition our grace and our love and our, our passion and our anger in the name of God for groups of people that are hurting, we're not always willing to do that. So I guess it's a community that really stands up for each other and embraces, and one that has LGBTQ people not just simply as invited to this space, but as, co-leading these conversations, which is why I'm so grateful to be here, because I've seen a lot of churches have conversations on these topics, not with an LGBTQ person involved.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons we wanted it always to be a conversation, because I don't have all the answers in this, and I can sit and pray and I still won't have all the answers for this. And so we really wanted, when it comes to all these different things, again, knowing that for some of you, this is one of those things where you're like, yeah, this is interesting. But for some of you, this is like deeply impassioned, like there's something we need to do better. How do we have better conversation even? Because that's a great, that's the thing you said, right? Even if you're not willing to go the full affirming route, people are being harmed because of this. And so how do we stand with Jesus, which if we read our scripture really is on the side of those who are being marginalized or oppressed. So here is my, kind of one of our closing things, and all of you are like, this just started. But we're just digging at these things, guys. I know we're going to go deeper, I promise. But what does it look like for like average people to take action? What would that look like? Someone who's deeply passionate. So we'll start with like just the average person who's like, yeah, I don't really think that it's a good idea that people are being marginalized, to the like, I feel super passionate. So let's start with like the average person. What's easy for folks to get involved in?
Okay, yeah, and I have a list, and I'm glad to talk to anybody if you're interested in getting involved in the kinds of things that you can be a part of. But I think at the most basic level, it's about showing compassion and love, and always keeping in mind there's a tendency in our communities to assume that everybody looks and thinks and is the same as us, and that if you don't know someone personally that is LGBTQ, that, or at least that hasn't come out to you, or hasn't disclosed that. I was going to say, statistically, that's impossible, but you do know people in your personal life, and more likely than not, people that you love and care about are a part of this community. And so always keeping that in mind and making sure the conversation is geared towards that possibility. And even just something I was, thinking of is including the possibility in your mind with every person you're talking to that they could be LGBTQ, even if it's a child of yours. Because, as I'm sure my mom could tell you, they did not expect me to be a member of this community. And, you never know. And by just telling people I love you and I will always be here for you, whatever it is, no matter what, and not inserting this idea always that, when you get a girlfriend or you get married, because maybe that's not an option or the plan for that person. So just keeping in mind inclusivity in that, you don't know people's hidden identities always, and how can you be the safest person possible that people want to share that with you and they want to work through that pain and that confusion at times. Sometimes there is no pain and confusion, but for a lot of us that grew up in the church, it is complicated. And how can you be a person that person can trust as they, journey in that way? And that could even just look like, things like making comments about being supportive of the community, wanting to be a part of the dialogue, or having a little rainbow pin on something. I don't know. Think about ways that you can tell people I am a safe person. So being proactive in your church environment, and again, using that inclusive language and not assuming gender or sexuality, creating spaces for LGBTQ people that are led, alongside LGBTQ people, and having, going out of your way if you want to meet members of our community, and going into our spaces. And, there's the LGBT Center of Orange County in Santa Ana, which is an amazing resource. There are always community events and pride events and opportunities to, come and meet people. And I think you can't fully know the LGBTQ community if you don't meet LGBTQ people that are also outside of the church. Because so many of us have been in and out, and we come into this environment with, complicated feelings in our own culture, and, wanting to understand and respect that. I think there's just so much to learn there. And then even beyond just those kind of basic things of showing love and, not assuming, if you want to take another step, it would be, standing up for people in your community, politically, civically, speaking out if you hear people making comments or disparaging, as well as speaking truth to power, when it comes to, to politics. And regardless of our particular political parties, being willing to stand up for LGBTQ people and saying this is non-negotiable. And we have, this is probably the most political thing I'm going to say, but we have a congressman, Dana Rohrabacher, who I believe covers this area. He's my representative in Aliso Viejo, that just a few weeks ago said publicly that he believes homeowners should be able to choose not to sell homes to LGBTQ people if it's against their beliefs. He thought that we had gone far enough with, making sure that people aren't discriminated on race, and that this would be going too far. Just thinking about the fact that we have a representative who's been here for 30 years who, is open to discriminating against LGBTQ people, like thinking about how we can hold our leaders and our community people to better, because I think that's one of the biggest downfalls that we can experience as a church that wants to be welcoming and affirming, as we say, you're allowed to come into our spaces. We love you. Here's the message of the gospel in Jesus. But we're not willing to take a stand for you because we're concerned we're going to alienate people or we're going to lose power or opportunities. But we're not, we're called to lose everything for the sake of Christ and the gospel. And, for LGBTQ people, a lot of that has been directed towards us to say, you need to lose everything and you need to have, no opportunity for love and, being who you really are, but to turn it on its head and to say, no, maybe our call is to advocate and that everything could be on the line if we, are bold in standing up for people. And there's so many ways, I think we can, speak out for our community. And just a couple other resources, the LGBT Center of Orange County, PFLAG is an amazing organization. It used to be Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. It's now just PFLAG, a space for LGBTQ people. They're trying to be more inclusive, but that's a space that anyone can come in and, learn how to be more supportive and hear the stories of families that are, trying to figure out how to be more supportive. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities, but that's just kind of a start there.
One of the things I know about this community is we may have an hour-long church service, but we usually have like an hour-long everybody hangs out and talks about things. So don't feel like this was cut off. If you have questions, if something stirred in you and you're like, I don't know how I feel about that. Some of you, you're like, my stomach stirred and I'm hungry. But if you had something stir in you and you would love to talk, this is Justin, this is his work. This is his life work, knowing that that he is called to speak to that kind of stuff. So I'm sure he would love to chat with you more about that. And there's great resources out there for sure.
Yeah, and I'll be around for a while after the service, so please say hi, and I'd love to keep in touch. And I have resources both on what for me was helpful into coming into my own identity and thinking through the tension of being a Christian and being gay, as well as just broader political and systemic change and how we can be a part of that. So.
And wherever you are on it, I just always think of that visual. I don't know if you've seen it. We have friends who are involved. There's an organization called Free Mom Hugs and Free Dad Hugs. Have you seen this? So it's guys who just stand and hug members of the community. And recently in Austin, I saw Free Pastor Hugs. And there was just someone who just was standing there, yeah, I'm a pastor, I'll hug you. And that was their job, which I think I'm qualified for. So that was an incredible thing. But there were all these people who were waiting in line to hug a pastor because for them, that was this is, you're here, and we're glad you're here. So thank you for risking, for stepping into sometimes a fearful space, for being here with us, for bringing folks that you love. We really appreciate that. We can clap at the end of this, I guess. Can we clap? Go ahead and clap. Okay. If you couldn't tell from our song earlier, we're just figuring out how to clap in this space. So this is new for us. So thank you so much, Justin. I would love to pray for him. And then if our musicians could move forward, we will close out by singing together, because that is what we are as children of God. So let us pray. Gracious and all-loving God, we don't always have all the answers. And so we really just have your example of what it means to be in community and fellowship with people. And it always seems like it demands that we step across the room and we ask the tough questions and we are present to a story that's different than ours. So God, thank you. Thank you for starting that in us. God, we are aware that for some of us, this conversation is so complicated. But God, that doesn't mean it's not one we're meant to have. So Lord, would you just open up the conversations that will happen because of this? God, will you open us up to hear from another? Will you open our sense of allowing vulnerability of our own beliefs and who we are? God, would we open that up, not just to you, but to those around us? And then for those of us engaged in conversation, Lord, will you make us a safe space, whatever that looks like? God, we thank you that you don't call us to surface relationships. You don't just call us to come on Sunday and shake hands and smile, but you ask us to not only know each other, but be known by each other. So God, we thank you for those spaces and places. Lord, it's in your most amazing name that I just ask that you would bless the work of Justin that he does as he goes into difficult places and spaces. I ask that you also would just be with those who go with him, those who will experience him. As always, God, would you remove fear and remind us that we are deeply connected because we're connected to you. Lord, it's in your name that we offer this. Amen.